Welcome, welcome, welcome. How is everybody doing? It is 2026. This is, in fact, January 7th. This is the RambleCast, and I'm your host, Cody Toombs. With me, I have Corbin Davenport.
Hello.
One of these days, I'm going to just have you start introducing yourself. It just
No,
feels like one of those things where your voice should be heard beyond just a hello.
I don't know what my name is until you say it. So,
Oh, yeah, I understand that problem. I've been there. Usually it takes uh, a couple good stiff drinks, but hey, who hasn't forgotten their name?
yeah, I think this is the second Celsius of the day, and it's not helping enough.
Yeah. Well, with the
I
world we
also
live
forgot to
in,
eat. I also forgot to eat dinner before this, so that will be after.
oh, fun. Well, on the plus side, there just aren't actually that many things to talk about. I guess, well, there's a
Yeah,
few, but
yeah. So this week was CES, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. I'm not there, obviously. Well, not obviously if you've never seen this before, but this is what my apartment looks like. I'm not there, which I am happy about, honestly. Um, and
what,
there's
you don't want
there's
to
always like
catch
a
the CES flu?
yeah. I don't want to go to the annual super spreader event um, necessarily, and all the plane trips that entails. Um, but CS is always like a lot of like volume of stuff, but a lot of it is not that interesting to me personally. I'm gonna venture to say that's true for Cody as well. It's just it's a lot of stuff. A lot of it is iterative based on things we've all seen and talked about already. A lot of it is just junk. I know I've seen snippets of people walking around and making fun of the various like AI startups that are there pushing just garbage, insane stuff. I don't really have a lot to say about that. So probably not going to talk about a lot of CS stuff here, just because it's it's PCs with this year's slightly iterative hardware. It's a lot of concept hardware, which I hate talking about unless I'm like there to try it, because trying it there is the only like takeaway, because otherwise I'm writing or talking about a thing that might not ever be reality, and it's just kind of weird to talk about. Like I was looking at some of the stuff like Lenovo was showing off all of their concepts, and they were talking about like you know what CPU it has or the screen. It's like, why would I talk about like the specs of something that's imaginary? Well, in theory not imaginary, because there's one there you can play around with, but that kind of thing. It's just it's not like useful or interesting to talk about, at least to me. Always the same like rollable screen demos that still can't be in a real product because the yields are not good, and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot. I don't want to talk about it. Like there's just I don't it's not interesting or fun. And that's, we're not here to go down the bullet list of everything everyone announced. That's boring.
Um, I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of pile on, but in a slightly different way. Uh, CES by and large or the companies that show up usually show off collectively a handful of actual new technology. 99% of what the companies are actually there to show you is a very dull, iterative update to some product or product line or their entire product catalog, even. And when I say iterative updates, I mean really, really boring and completely like this. There was no point putting this product on a plane so people could touch it. That they should have just put like put out a blog post and not bother paying for a booth. Most of CES is that. That's not to say that there aren't a few other products that are, actually good, but they're few and far between. They really are. So, you know,
Yeah, and I have no doubt that like if I was there and I had complete agency over what I was doing that day, I'd probably go check out what all the weird VR companies are doing, just hang out there the whole day. Because that's kind of where like my interest level is at this point. I'm like, wow, you guys are making weird stuff I haven't seen before. That's kind of neat. But
yeah, speaking of
uh, uh,
weird stuff, Austin just linked to a WoW level weird stuff.
yeah, it's there's always poop stuff at CES, poop toilet stuff. They can't get enough of that. Um, yeah, so I again, not like a lot of CS stuff to talk about, I guess. Um, just I noticed that it is happening. I did add a couple of things in here that I ended up writing about or talking about at work, that I have some thoughts on, but this is not the CES bonanza. There's just not a lot there that I personally care all that much about.
Yeah, and look, I don't mean to. I don't want to like rain on anyone's parade regarding CES. If people see things that they're interested in, that's fantastic. Um, Generally speaking, I think most of what happens at CES, it's still worth doing in the sense of who they're targeting to actually care about anything. Um, the problem is on the broader scale, like, is it interesting, is it actually something consumers should be paying attention to? And in that regard, the answer is it's kind of like Kickstarter campaigns. Remember when all the blogs used to cover Kickstarter campaigns for everything, and like half the campaigns never happen at half, what am I saying, 90% of the campaigns never actually like made enough money to even succeed. The ones that did happen, the products were usually bad, or didn't materialize. And then out of the like 0.5% of campaigns that were covered that actually did like succeeded, they materialized, the products were shipped, then hooray, there was 0.5% that were legitimate and worth paying attention to. That's a pretty bad hit rate. And yeah, that's kind of what you get with CES. Obviously, more of the products end up being real, but it's still not a great hit rate. And so, getting too excited about any particular thing usually kind of isn't worth it. So, yeah. Anyway, at least in the interim, I think neither of us are that motivated to really look at any individual announcement unless it's pretty world changing. And right now, nothing is, or at least nothing I saw.
Yeah, I mean, I was spending a lot of December going through the large embargo Dropbox folders from all the companies that were sending them over, and it just kind of turns into like creative writing prompts basically, where it's a lot of like kind of boring stuff, and the companies maybe themselves don't do that great of a job highlighting what's important. Not to blame like the PR people at these companies, because this is a lot of boring stuff, but
It's
so
okay.
it's
You can
it's
blame
just
them a
it's
little.
just a lot of it's a lot to trudge through, and a lot of it is not that interesting. So I ended up writing about a lot of stuff that I personally don't really find interesting, but things had to be written, and I didn't have anything else to do in December because the news is pretty slow. Well, tech news. All the other news is at such a rapid pace. I wish it would stop, but the horrors are never ending, including uh, the horrors of the publicly traded companies.
Well, not publicly traded yet, but certainly the possibility is there. That's our first actual topic. It's come out that Discord is exploring the possibility of going public. They have filed for um I forget what it's actually called. I read this just a couple hours ago and I've already forgotten, but basically they filed for an application to explore the possibility of going public. Um, and this would basically mean that they would, or if they go forward with this, it would turn Discord eventually into a publicly traded company, blah, blah, blah. Now, when you get into all the specifics, there's a lot to what they're actually asking for. Um, and the details kind of don't matter. What really just matters is nothing's actually happened yet. They're just looking into it. Um, I find this immediately a little concerning because Discord, for better or worse, is one of those companies that has generally focused on trying to grow and trying to build a loyal user base. And I argue they've actually been very successful at it. They've grown beyond gaming, obviously, as anyone can see by the community we have uh, for my channel. And not to say gaming isn't well represented as well, but you get the idea. Um, and it's turned into a really, really good, effective chat client for a lot of different communities. They've also been in the news a number of times for both good and bad things. The problem is, and what worries me, is Discord going public would mean that they then have to start making decisions that are based less on what they consider good for communities, good for the user base, and they have to start making decisions based on what's good for profit. Now, look, I fully acknowledge it is a company. They need to make profit. I don't begrudge them that at all. Where I find concern is that eventually this means putting profit ahead of what sometimes is actually good for the company. I know that sounds a little a little ridiculous, but it's something that we've seen Apple struggle with over the years. At one point in history, Apple used to famously say, you know what, we don't care about profit on this issue. We're just going to do what we think is good for our products, like to actually make them just better for users. And that was a good mantra. Unfortunately, like I said, they've struggled with it, and we've seen Apple make some really catastrophically stupid decisions in the pursuit of profit. I really hope that we don't see that happen with Discord. Corbin, I sense you wanted to say things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Discord's ever discussed their like how close to profitability they are, or if they've got there. I assume they don't. They're not profitable because they have done funding round after funding round, and I don't know. I look at Discord and I see something that I don't know how you uh make it a profitable service without just completely destroying how it got here in the first place. Does every like major messaging platform, it's always like bolted to something else that makes money, or it's run by a larger company that is okay with the messaging being a loss leader, whether that's Google or Meta or anyone else, uh, just because there's not a lot of ways to make money there. You can shove ads everywhere, but then you start chasing away people until you just sort of like put ads between messages. I guess that's the final stage, and that's when you really lose everyone. I know they've tried to do stuff with, their weird, currency and boosting servers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would like, I am paying for Discord right now, not necessarily because I'm getting much use out of the features that subscription provides, but more just like, hey, I like this service and I'd like it to stick around. You can have my money. Um, I'm assuming under the, hopeful assumption that the service won't get dramatically worse while I'm giving you money. Um, but yeah, I don't know what they could do to make it, because it's just in such a weird place. And I would assume that when they need to start getting serious about money is when they will start cutting off like chat history. Like I could not even start to guess how much storage space is taken up by a bunch of like images and videos and huge files that were uploaded once and then never looked at or accessed again, but they're still staying around. So that would be like my first assumption of what happens whenever, you know, either they go public and then need to start cutting costs to appease investors, or they need to start cutting costs to continue existing. Is they'll do the Slack model of, if you're not, paying money for a specific server, then your history past, I think it's a couple weeks, gets cut off. I don't know what Slack's free workspaces are like now, but it's pretty bad.
Last I saw it was 30 days, but I haven't looked
Okay.
in a long, long time. Um,
Yeah.
and the funny thing is, Slack doesn't even delete that history. They just don't let you see it. So
Right.
you can always pay
They're
to unlock it.
doing, yeah, they're doing what, like, I remember PhotoBucket doing for forever until they finally deleted everything. Um, where they're like, you pay us to get your files back. It would be a shame if something happened to all those files.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, just, through whatever means it happens with, I think Discord will eventually have to figure out a more sustainable operation, which would mean it getting worse. Um, Discord's also in the weird place where there's not really like a there's definitely not like a self-hosted or open source alternative, and I'm not even sure there's like an alternative period with like its specific features, especially like the screen sharing stuff and how it handles voice calls. Because the way like Slack and Google Meet and stuff works is pretty different. And the pricing obviously is completely different. That's why Discord is where it's at now, because it's the only one that doesn't charge you like $10 per person to have a usable experience. So it's annoying. Um, Hopefully the alternatives will catch on once Discord starts to degrade here.
So yeah, there is. I know there are a couple of self-hosted options that exist. Obviously, you could go with something like Matrix. Not that that's the same thing, but at least it puts you in sort of that chat server relevance. Um, if I saw one person mention something called Stoat that I guess used to be Revolt. I don't know anything about that
Yeah,
one, but
I know the one that was used by a bunch of open source or FOSS projects was Matrix, but Matrix sucks. It's
yeah, I
like
haven't
the
used it.
most. It's not a good experience even after you figure it out. I think it's more complicated than like Mastodon. It has the same problem of intermixing terminology of like servers and channels and stuff, and it's very confusing and not good. um I am in one IRC server at this point, and modern IRC is actually okay, um, because they have added more uh, updates to whatever standard it's called. I forget what the term is, where you can get like push notifications and stuff now.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe that will continue getting better if Discord gets worse, but it's rough.
Yeah, truth be told, I wouldn't mind going back to IRC to some extent. Like there are some problems with IRC, uh, mostly wrapped around like uploading of images and videos and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
And
wouldn't
the
mind.
voice would need to be a separate component entirely. We're all going back to TeamSpeak.
Truth be told, I'd be okay with that. Like I love having it in Discord. It's really convenient, but I'm I'd be okay with just having a separate thing to handle voice and video and screen sharing and that stuff. It's it's just nice having it in Discord, but
Yeah.
it feels like something that just it's okay if it exists elsewhere. Um and yeah, you know, with all these things considered, I can't help but look at this and think, am I in say a year gonna have to start trying to migrate off of Discord to something else? I hope not, but I also look, I know the realities of things like this, and I I'm just worried it's gonna happen. And the thing that really sucks about having to do that, one, you have to find something that's good. And that alone is already some work. And you're probably not going to find something that's as good. You're just going to find something that is good enough and will work. And then you have to,
Yeah, there's no drop in replacement for Discord right now.
right. But then once you find something that is at least good enough, you then have to sell it to everyone who is already part of the community. And no matter what, you're going to lose some people. Which at that point, and you know, obviously like I'm talking about this from the perspective of running a small group, um which one of these days I need to get growing. But I, you know, from any perspective, whether you run a server just among yourself and some friends, you and I have obviously had this exact discussion with a different server, um, where there were efforts to move at least one channel to somewhere else, and that went nowhere because nobody wants to do that. No one wants to install another app. Nobody wants to install uh, a different chat client. No one wants to set up different things across phones, phones, tablets, computers, desktops, laptops, whatever. Like nobody wants to do that. No one wants more stuff cluttering up all their devices. And so yeah, it's such a rough position. And like I said, I'm looking at this from running a small community. There are obviously people who run huge Discord servers. There are people who run just private little groups that are themselves and like a handful of friends. All these different things or all these different use cases scale, and I there is not really one. There obviously currently isn't a very good drop-in solution, but I'm not sure that that one is even going to be made. Like there might be a good drop-in solution someday for one of these types of use cases, but will there be for all of them? The same type of server that can host, you know, you and a handful of people that maybe you self-host or something like that isn't necessarily going to be a good solution for somebody who runs a community of like 40,000 fans. So yeah, there's going to be some complications here, and I don't know which direction that's going to swing. Because truthfully, I think if anything, some company out there is probably looking at this and thinking the smart play for them is to try to make something that like your huge Twitch streamers are going to be willing to spend some money on, not necessarily the thing that like you want to run for a handful of people. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be annoying whenever it happens. And again, this is something Google could have figured out a decade ago.
No, they couldn't.
Man, I, you know, there's that line from The Office where Andy's like, I wish I knew I was in the good times before I leave them. And that's what I feel every time I go back to like 2012 Google Hangouts that just like worked flawlessly on my phones and had like the syncing push notifications, and I was on Project Fi, so my texts were going through there too, and it was so good. And Google just completely fucked up like 15 times straight, and now they have a video conferencing app and then a weird Slack clone that both users and companies don't want.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. It boggles the mind. And speaking of Google fucking up, there was a statement. I guess this was something that Android Authority or Michelle at Android Authority was looking into, and Google gave them a comment. And basically, Google told Android Authority that starting this year, 2026, Google will publish source code to AOSP twice a year, once in the second quarter and another time in the fourth quarter. And AOSP, if you don't know, is the open source part of Android. It's the part you can go download and compile and, run on. It really doesn't do much by itself at this point, but projects like Lineage OS and other Android distributions and custom ROMs can craft an operating system around it. And over time, AOSP has kind of become less and less useful on its own, as all of the, AOSP was originally like most of the Android operating system. Like, it was really just everything except the Play Store or Android market as it used to be. And then Google started pulling out, they stopped working on the app in AOSP and then work on an upgraded version for their devices, and Samsung would be doing the same, and LG and so on. So all of the apps in AOSP, the ones that still exist, are like ancient and don't work. That's why, like, if you go through and read the blog post from like Lineage OS, or I forget what the super privacy one is.
I can't remember.
But like
I've lost interest in
like,
that scene.
Lineage OS, they've talked a lot about how a lot of their work is just building entirely new apps for like the phone dialer and contacts and calendars, because the ones Google built have not been open source in like a decade. So AOSP at this point is pretty much just like the bare Android operating system, and that's it. And this is also have been kind of moving to the point where Android, I don't know enough about AOSP to know like when exactly the shift happened, but my impression is that Android used to be a far more like Linuxy open source operating system, where there were some individual contributions as well as companies working on it, and then it kind of shifted to really just Samsung and the big companies working on it, and now it's just kind of Google's thing, and you'll get the source code later at some point.
Oh, yeah, that's a more complicated discussion than we could really dig into just in a casual sense. So I will say this about it. Man, where to tackle that? It, I think this is why it's already hard to talk about, because there's a lot of nuances to this. Um, First off, the way I would say it is, when you think about what AOSP is today, first off, it does contain some, we'll just call it legacy stuff that they just don't have a good way to remove. Just plain and simple, there are some projects in there that are a decade old. And by that, I mean, haven't been updated in a decade. They were just abandoned, but the code is still there. That stuff can be largely be ignored. And that's a lot of the so-called apps, like the clock app, there used to be an email app. There was various other things.
Widgets.
Yeah, widgets.
I love installing the Android emulator, and it's still got the like Android Froyo, like Android setup widget in there. That's fun. That's a fun throwback.
Yeah. So Android, or what AOSP has become today, is basically the current version of the core operating system plus its shell. And for anyone who's not quite a follower of these phrases, think of Windows, think of Windows. There is a core operating system that runs like file management, process management. It incorporates like the runtimes that your applications run in. I'm not going to get into explaining runtimes here. But basically just the code that's responsible for running applications. And you can go down a long list of all the core components of an operating system. Then the shell is the part that basically renders stuff. Like it is a graphical interface that contains some core functionality. And it's responsible for rendering, handling touch, things like that. So that's the stuff that's in AOSP today. And there's more. It's certainly not just that stuff, but that's pretty much what you actually are getting. Those are the things that if they weren't up, or if they were not universal, apps would not work right. Straight up, you need these things to be universal for apps to work correctly. And that's where, or what gets added on top is usually the stuff that Samsung, Google, OnePlus, other companies that shall be named later, but may not be named for much longer. Yeah, that's what those companies then show up and they add for themselves. That's basically their skin. That's the layout that they, or the stuff that they add is like the actual launcher that they're building. The things that make their implementations slightly different in some way, shape, or form. And most of them are still basing their stuff off of other things that are in AOSP, but they're actually making more meaningful modifications then. The thing is, yes, at one point, I know all that stuff to get into what you had just said about Android being more Linuxy. Yeah, it was. Very simply, yeah, Android used to be more like a Linux distribution in that it was kind of the full thing, but then it had a whole separate, it was the full thing, and you could almost download it and just use it straight out of the box, so to speak. Obviously, you still had to add some hardware specific, like drivers, um, whatever term you want to use for them. And you had to sometimes make some certain concessions on what would work and what wouldn't. But for the most part, you could download AOSP, uh, configure it for the specific hardware it was going to run on, and do a build, and it would run on that. That's not so true these days. So yeah, that like Linuxy distribution that used to exist is pretty much dead. Again, I'm sure the legacy code is still there. You could probably still do that to some extent, but it's gonna work like garbage, if it even works at all. I couldn't say. But yeah, that shift happened years ago. It's been a long time since Android was really runnable in any meaningful form. These days, I wish I could remember the name of it, but these days I would compare it more to like some of those Linux distributions that are not even really usable distributions. They're meant to be like baseline distributions that others are supposed to build on top of. Like at one point, wow, all of a sudden all of Nils's comments just streamed into my video view. Not sure why that happened. Anyway, so a lot of these, I would almost refer to them as like kit operating systems. They're the starter pack that you then use to build other stuff on top of. And that's great in some ways. Other ways kind of sucks. I don't know. At this point, I'm not really sure where this conversation even goes. But
well, it's the difference between like I think when people think open source, they think sort of like it's like some level of collaboration. Like there's people working on it who are maybe outside of the whoever owns it. Maybe sometimes other organizations get to make some decisions or something, and that's not really how Android has worked.
Okay, in fairness, there are a lot of companies that still contribute to Android. Like, just no questions asked. There are still companies contributing back upstream to Google, basically. We know for a fact that Samsung, like every couple years, there's some news story about, oh, well, Samsung worked on this with Google and now it's just part of Android. Woohoo! So we know Samsung's doing this all the time. Other companies, without question, are doing it. We're just hearing less about it because, quite frankly, there are fewer companies involved in making Android phones. We're going to be talking about that more in a little while. There are also companies that are there are plenty of companies obviously making devices that run Android, but how many of them are contributing, we really don't know. But I think it's safe to assume it's probably actually quite a few. It's just we don't hear about it, and unless you're like digging around in the source code looking for examples of such and such company did a push with this particular change. Unless you see that and you're looking for it, you're not going to find it. And nobody talks about that stuff. It's usually just, oh, we needed to tweak this thing to work on this kind of hardware. That's it. That's usually the kind of changes that they're making. And so that stuff's still happening. I mean, the Android kernel is definitely still getting a fair amount of contributions from other companies. They obviously also get a ton of stuff out of Qualcomm and any of the chip makers, because obviously, like, they're constantly making contributions, because those contributions make Android run on their chips. So yeah, that stuff is still happening. The question becomes, how much is it happening from true outsiders? And by that I mean anything from security researchers to we'll say hobbyists who just kind of come along and spot something and think, oh, Well, that's wrong. Here, I'll fix it. That stuff used to happen a lot. I can tell you, holy crap, does it not happen anymore? I'm sure it does happen, but it happens a lot less. Because I actually tried making a correction to AOSP many, many years ago. And the process you had to go through back then was misery. Absolute horror show. You had to download the entire AOSP source code repo, jump through a bunch of hoops just so you could make your changes and then submit them. I gave up. Like, it just wasn't worth it. It was too much hassle. I ended up just sending a message to somebody at Google that I knew and being like, "Hey, here's a code change. I'm not doing this BS. Like, it's just not going to happen." And his response was basically "Oh yeah, no, it sucks. We don't get a lot of these except from like specific people at specific companies." And so, yeah, that's a thing that happens. Now, on to the change and why this is all relevant. So Google, as Corbin mentioned earlier, is going to be shifting to doing AOSP drops twice a year. Once in Q2, once in Q4. And basically, that's just going to be it. Like, they're going to still be updating the source code internally, but they're only going to be releasing official drops twice a year.
Right. It's more like all of the companies that work. It's like all the companies that work on proprietary software and operating systems, but somewhere in the license it says they have to release source code, so they'll put the mandatory zip file on their server somewhere every once in a while, and they're like, "All right, we did it."
Mm-hmm.
So,
and yeah, I mean that's I forget what the agreed upon term is for as in term of time, how long it is between when you release something and when you're supposed to get the source code out. Whatever that period is, I think twice yearly updates like this is actually going past what the typical licenses are for GPL, because AOSP does have some GPL code in it, just plain and simple, like they do. And so yeah, I don't know if they're technically violating GPL with this. I kind of don't care. I've never had the strongest opinion of GPL as it is. But yeah, so there's been so much explanation here. I feel like it kind of lost the thread of the news. But moving to this twice yearly thing, what Google is saying, and I'll just read the statement verbatim. It says, effective 2026, to align with our trunk stable development model and ensure platform stability for the ecosystem, we will publish source code to AOSP in Q2 and Q4. For building and contributing to AOSP, we recommend utilizing Android-latest-release instead of AOSP-main. The AOSP-latest-release manifest branch will always reference the most recent release push to AOSP. For more information, see changes to AOSP. Okay. So what does this really mean? Not much. They were already doing this. They used to release 4 times per year. Now they're doing twice per year. Honestly, at this stage, I'm kind of not sure whether they're even going to do the Q4 release. They may as well just do the Q2 alone. Or am I reversing those? No, well, wait. Q2 should be the beta release period that happens during I/O. Q4 should be. That's okay. Do they have their quarters offset? Now I'm wondering that because
I don't know
Q.
because they did already change the release schedule for this coming year. Because they
Yeah.
wanted to do more frequent, stable releases.
Well, okay. Anyway, key point is they do one release when it's like the major OS update, like a new version of Android comes out, and that's when they do one of the drops. Uh, when they do the other drop, it should be. I swear the other drop usually was not 6 months later, but whatever. It doesn't matter. Um, but they're basically saying that they want to do this for two reasons. Or well, it's a few reasons, but one of them is to actually deal with that issue that I brought up earlier about making submissions to AOSP. The problem was they had a lot of people who would submit bug fixes or security fixes or whatever, and it would be something that they already fixed internally. So in theory, they think somehow releasing less often is going to minimize the amount of people submitting bug fixes, which is wrong, obviously, because people are going to have now older source code to work from when they're submitting a bug fix. So yeah, that's not really going to fix a problem. It's actually going to make it worse. The other reason, which kind of goes actually in the same line of thinking, is that they're doing this so that they can stick with a trunk stable development model, which I also don't have the highest opinion of for other reasons. But for those that aren't programmers, trunk stable development is basically the concept of doing all of your code changes in a single branch. In this case, usually the main branch of a code repository, and doing small, quick, incremental changes instead of what's called feature branches. Feature branches, the idea of that is basically you take the code as it exists today, you go off and work on a feature until it's done, and you do this more or less in private, and then you come back and resubmit your branch. All that code gets integrated in one big push, and yeah, that's your more typical feature branch style of development. Trunk stable development makes sense for bug fixes. I don't personally think that it makes sense for actual features in most cases. There are exceptions. If you can do something in an afternoon, go ahead. Great. Do trunk stable development for that. I think it's a bad idea otherwise. They thought I just heard a car behind me. So
Just
yeah,
frustrating,
go ahead.
I guess. The one kind of interesting thing I did see here was as far as like mobile operating systems that like are on beyond Apple, which of course you don't get to change how it works at all. There's really just Android and the various Linux mobile distributions that are all generally far less stable than Android, just because it's it when you install like Lineage OS on a Pixel phone or whatever, it's including a lot of the proprietary bits that were built for Android, and it doesn't work like that on Linux. So when you go look at like Postmarket OS is kind of the main one right now. It's like it works on like 20 usually old Android phones, and there's a lot of stuff broken, and the one kind of interesting insight I saw from this news was some of those Linux developers pointing out that like now that's kind of the only like real open source project going on. The only one that has like uh I don't know, like fully open collaborative kind of project. Linux on mobile is really interesting in that it's not really stable, but it's kind of the only thing like that. Where on PCs we're so used to desktop, a bunch of different flavors of desktop Linux that are mostly pretty stable. The issue with Linux in recent history has just been what apps it does and doesn't have. But Linux mobile is kind of it's a much more wild west. It's more like most things will not work, but that's kind of the fun of it. And then hopefully eventually gets to a better place. And I do wonder if maybe this will push more interest in that ecosystem. I don't know. It's just it's an interesting thing to contemplate where for a lot of people their phone is their only computer, and Linux was able to be alternative OS for the last type of computer that everyone had, and with phones it's less of a thing. Phones and tablets, I should say. I don't know if there was anything coherent in there, but just the general vibe of like mobile Linux is in a more unique place now that Android is exiting.
Okay, I'm going to take. I'm going to go with kind of the hottest take there is here. We just spent a whole lot of time talking about this subject when in reality, this is the biggest nothing burger that there possibly could be.
Right.
Truthfully, like I mentioned before, they used to do 4 of these drops per year, as opposed to at one point in time they used to basically do most of the development sort of out in the open. Obviously they had stuff that they were doing in private, and for those that don't know, AOSP is basically the public facing side, and internally Google has always done all their development privately, or more or less always.
Right. Whenever you go in the source code for Android, or what I notice much more often in my writing is Chromium. If you go digging in there, you'll find links all over the place to documentation that is internal to Google. Like I will pretty frequently find a Chrome feature, and in the commit message is like, this is where we're talking about it. Oops, I can't look at that link.
Well, that's a little different. I mean, that's the documentation or a discussion forum,
right. The development
like
is still happening in the open, but I'm not allowed to know the full context.
Right. Whereas with Android, the development is literally not happening in the open. It is happening in private, but they just happen to also have basically a duplicate repository. And it's not duplicated at all. Not even close. It's just very similar. And they have a bot that's whole job is to basically take the internal stuff, sort of copy it to the public side, and it does a lot to sort of filter that out. And like back when I used to do the AOSP like update articles, and I took a script that at the time was very broken. Most people didn't realize it was broken, but oh boy was it. And I started I had to go through it and figure out how to fix it. And as I did that, I started discovering, there's just spots where the code mysteriously changes, and it obviously was not supposed to do that. Like these individual commits somehow move code in weird ways that obviously were not intentional. And the more time I spent looking at it, the more I realized, they completely broke AOSP. Like, AOSP is just wrong. in various ways. And then mysteriously, like, you'll see code commits that were obviously intended to do just like one little change, and they'll actually have like dozens and dozens of changes that have nothing related to do, or nothing related to the commit messages with them. And it's like, okay, yeah, I clearly see what's happening here. It's just really dumb. And what's even funnier is you like, I would find various commits where like a individual line was what was supposed to be added, but it has like 100 lines somewhere else in the file that were added. And then like 2 commits later on the same branch, those 100 lines, exact same 100 lines, would just disappear. And some other little line was added or removed or changed or something like that. And it's like, guys, you're kind of like, you made it obvious. This is not a good system anymore. You need to fix it. Anyway, it's not really the most important thing. But my take on this is, it's not going to change anything. Lineage is going to grumble about this. Obviously, all of the ROM makers, and anyone who cares about AOSP is going to grumble a little bit, because they're going to be getting, or they're going to be working from source code that's now upwards of 6 months old instead of 3 months old. I get it. That's annoying. But in reality, is this going to make anyone leave Android? No. In reality, is any partner really not getting a latest version? No. Are there any companies out there that even care that they're not getting the absolute latest? Not really. I mean, a few of them are going to, again, be a little annoyed by this, but for the most part, it doesn't matter anymore. Android is a pretty mature operating system in terms of function. And the little tiny changes that are made from here on out are mostly going to not affect most companies in any meaningful way. This is okay, at least in those terms. Does it suck that a thing that used to be the, like, kind of a guiding light of what open source can be and why it's valuable and why it's why we like it, and now it's slowly becoming more and more closed? Yeah, that sucks. Obviously it sucks, but you know, I hate to put it this way, but what's anyone going to do about that? Nothing. This is just something we're kind of stuck with, and I don't think that it's going to really motivate anyone to shift away from building on Android to go to some other Linux project. Not to say that it can't. I just don't think it's enough. This is one of those things. It's sort of the frog in the boiling water thing. Like, if this is what it was on day one, people would have been less enthusiastic about it. But Google now controls Android. Android pretty much is where it is, and it's not going to become more open after this. And people are just going to live with it. And that's also okay, because it mostly doesn't change anything for anybody out there. All Google is really doing here is saying that they just want to spend less time maintaining AOSP, because that's what this actually is in the long run. This means that instead of 4 times a year somebody has to sit down and make sure that there is a presentable version of AOSP to shove out into the world, now that person only has to do it twice a year. And that's why I think eventually, I give it another year or two, and we're going to see them get rid of this almost entirely. They're going to back it up to just 1 release per year. It's going to be when they do the major OS release, and that's it.